Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Today what we're going to do is talk about the animation effects that we can apply to text inside of After Effects. So just real quick, I just have a finished example for you here, just so you can see what we're getting to. We can make our text move, we can make it scale, we can make it skew, rotate, mess with the opacity, and do everything all at once if we want to. Now obviously we can do a lot of these things with keyframes like we've learned before. We've been able to use opacity before, but the cool thing about the animation effects in the layer, which we're going to talk about, is that it kind of helps you do things a little bit quicker and gives you different options. So let's go ahead and let's try it out. So first thing you want to do is make a new composition inside of After Effects. Depending on how fast your computer is, you can do 1920 by 1080, or if you think you want to make it a little bit smaller, you can also do that. So for example, I might want to just do it just to make it easier on my computer. I could change the setting to HDV 720/25. That'll make it a smaller 1280 by 720, and the frame rate in this case is 25, which is cool. It's going to be a little less than 29. You could also put it to 24 if you want. That would be fine too. And let's just call this animated text. And let's go ahead and press OK. So we have a brand new blank canvas in front of us, and I'm just going to go ahead and give myself a little bit more room here on the side with my windows. And the first thing you'll want to do is go ahead and grab your type tool and go ahead and click something out. So the first one we can do is we can do position. Now I'm just going to write the word position, but you can write any word that you want. I'm going to just now center this. If you remember, we've got shortcuts, but we can also use the align tool. We can center it onto the middle of the canvas. Remember, we can also press Command Option Home to center the center point. Just make sure you have it there in the center of your canvas. And then this is actually some pretty easy steps. So what we're going to do is take a look at our text layer. We're going to open up the text layer, and where it says text, we're going to now click on the animate button. And there's this list of stuff right here that we're going to choose from. And we're going to go ahead and choose that one that says position. Now when we do this, we're going to get a new setting we haven't played with yet in our class, which is Animator 1. So it's going to make this thing called Animator 1. And then once it makes this thing called Animator 1, you're going to be able to change some settings here. You might want to go ahead and press enter and just call it Position Animator, so you remember that this is the Position Animator. And again, what did I do to get there? I pressed on Animate and I pressed Position. So open up the layer, Animate, press Position. Now once you get it there, I just renamed it just to make my life easier. And now I'm going to open it up and take a look at what's in there. So I have a setting for position, and then I have a range selector. Let's look at position first. If you move this around, you can move the position of the word up, down, left, or right. So you can decide wherever you want that to go. Let's go ahead and I'm going to bring it down for now. So I'm going to slide the second value over so that the words fall off the screen. Now depending on your size of your screen, you might have a bigger number there or a smaller number, whatever it is. Just go ahead and get it off the screen. So as you already remember from before, we could keyframe this value, which would be cool. But for now, let's just leave it alone for a second, and let's take a look at what's up here. There's this thing that's the range selector. And you'll notice that even without having to animate anything with keyframes, it'll already actually start to do a lot of stuff for us, which is actually really cool. It's a quick way to animate. So again, all I did was just move it off the screen, and then the next thing was I opened up the range selector, and I can modify the start value. Right now it's set to 0, but if I put it back and slide this all the way to 100, it'll return to that position that I had earlier, which is really cool. And of course, I could just animate this by pressing Start, slide my mouse over, and go ahead and increase that value. And that's awesome. So it's super quick. I'm able to animate the letters moving. I didn't have to do more than just 2 steps. I just modified the position, and then I modified the start value. Now, of course, you could change this if you want. Let's go ahead and delete the keyframes just to see another option. I could have, instead of animating the start, I could have animated the end. So I could leave it at 100 there, and then try 0 here. And you'll see, pretty similar way to do it. So again, you can start messing around with the start and the end. If you play around with the offset value, it'll also kind of play around with the way it animates. And you can kind of stop and start in a different location. Now this is going to be different for every word that you make, and you'll notice it actually kind of changes where things happen. So you might want to have some fun with this. Again, I'm just doing an experiment here. Like, let's offset a different value here, and then bring the value to something else here. And I'm just making, just a mess right now, just so we can see how we can kind of jump up and down with offset. And obviously you want to have a little bit of fun with this as much, because you can just experiment. Basically the offset is changing where the animation is going to happen. So play around with that. And of course, if you don't like it, just get rid of those keyframes. I'll put the offset back to 0. So now it's just going to do what it was doing before, which I thought was pretty cool, just moving up and down. It's pretty awesome. Let's go ahead now and open up Advanced, because now we get a whole bunch of other steps. Now the thing with this, and I would recommend that you just really play around with it, because there's so much that you can do here. But as you can see with the animation that we got going, right now every letter is moving one at a time. You can actually change that. You can change it to words instead of character, and then you'll notice it just moves the whole word instead of each individual character, which is also kind of cool if you wanted. But I kind of like characters. Again, experiment. If you start looking down here, you'll also notice there's an option for shape, square, and ramp up. These are going to do slightly different things. You'll see the animation, it goes a little bit differently depending on how we change that. Ramp down. I kind of like ramp down, I think. So you see you get some really cool, quick and easy effects that are just happening with a couple changes here. Doing round now. And you might want to modify stuff after you experiment with these. Really, this is one of these projects where the more you mess around with it, you'll discover something really cool. So let's just put it back on square where we started, where they all were just going one at a time. Right? And now we can also play around with ease. If we bring that up, you'll notice they kind of travel differently. Let's put ease back to 0. With ease at a high, they're kind of moving a little bit quicker. They almost fly so fast you can kind of barely tell that they're dragging, versus when I had ease high at 0. You can kind of see it a little bit better. It's very subtle. I'll do that again. And again, experiment. You might like it going really fast or not. Now, the fun thing here is just go nuts. See what you can do here. Experiment, experiment, experiment. The one thing I'd say you can now add after you've experimented, just that'll make everything come to life a little bit more, is if you go to the layer and you take a look at the top row, and we have the motion blur setting, let's go ahead and hit motion blur, because that's going to add a little bit of a blur as it moves, which is really cool. If I press spacebar to watch it, you'll see that blur happening. And I like that, right? So that's a simple one for position. Obviously, play around with all this and have fun. And of course, you can bring in all the other things we've talked about before. You can move it around, you can scale it, you can rotate it, you can change the opacity. All we're doing by adding these animation presets is we're kind of cheating a little bit, and we're getting some stuff done quicker, but we can still do all the other things that we've done before. Cool. So let's take a look at another one. This was position. I'm just going to go ahead and lock it. I'm going to turn off the eyeball, and I can right click and go to new text. And then for this next one, let me remember the name. The next one is scale. So for this next one, let's type in scale. Same thing as before, you can do Command Option Home. You can use the Align tool to center it on the canvas. And then now let's take a look at scale. So it's just the word, whatever word you want, but now you're going to go to where it says text, you're going to click on animate, and now you're going to choose scale. Now when you choose scale, again, you're going to get this little new range selector. You might want to change the name of your range selector. I'm going to click away, and excuse me, above the range selector, you might want to change the name of the animator. So I'm just going to click on it, and I'm just going to write Scale Animator. That way I remember what I'm doing, because it can get a little confusing if you don't remember what it is that you're adjusting. So when we're looking at the Scale Animator, we get a scale and a range selector. Let's take a look at scale and see what it does. It can make the words grow or shrink, which is pretty cool. Obviously, you can decide what flavor you want in that, how you want it to move. One thing that is kind of important for this one, because of the fact that the letters grow all together, and for some of you that might look a little messy, is that you can open up where it says More Options. So this will be important for this one because you can make it so that it does the growth by character or by word. I might want to choose word, so I went to More Options, Anchor Point Grouping, because now when I scale it up, it's going to scale the whole word. And I think that looks a little bit cleaner for me. But again, you like it the other way? Do it the other way. You can also change the settings here. Some of them we might not notice it as much with this setting. Like for these, you can see there's a subtle difference there between all and word. Like where the growth is happening. I think all is actually kind of cool. Kind of more growing from the center of the whole thing, which is kind of nice. So why don't we leave it on that one for now, and then we can close More Options for a second. And now we could animate this. We could do some keyframe adjustments here. So let's do that. Why don't we make it really small first? And I have -4 here, and I'll keyframe that. And then at a second in, I'm going to slide that to get it bigger. Right, so here's just a quick scale adjustment, which again, you could have done this with transform. This is not that different than what you could have done just by opening up transform and playing with scale. But now let's go ahead and open up the range selector, and this is where obviously we get some subtleties that we can do, right? You see how we're able to grow each individual letter in this case. Now again, this also has to do with the other settings I had in More Options. You can also offset that. You can also go backwards, right? So let's just experiment with that. Why don't we do it with 100 at the beginning, and then by the end I'll put it at 0, right? And let's see what that looks like. That's pretty cool. You see it's kind of got a little bit of life as it's growing because I adjusted the range selector, which is cool. Originally it was at 100 and 0, right? If I just delete all those keyframes that I just added for the end, originally it was just growing as one word, which was cool too, but I kind of like the idea of playing with the end value, 100 in the beginning and then 0 at the end. It's got a little more life as it comes into scale. And as you can probably imagine, we can open up advanced as well, and we can start messing around with this stuff. For example, let's play around with ease low. Let's see what that does. Some of these are going to be subtle, some of them will be not so subtle. It's got a little bit of life that's been added when I added ease low. Let's watch it. Now let's go back. Let's put ease low back at 0. Not that big of a deal, but it changed it slightly. Maybe if I play around with some of the other stuff like shape, ramp down. Yeah, the growth seems a little bit different now. It almost looks like it's growing a little bit more on the right, faster than it was before. And on ramp up, it's going to start from the left. That's kind of nice. Kind of like that. And maybe I'll add a little bit of ease low to that. Let's experiment. See what that looks like. Actually, you know what, to be honest, I prefer it without the ease. But of course, you are going to play around and have some fun with this, however you like. Just start opening these things up. So again, what we did is, obviously first we clicked here, and we went to Scale. Then I renamed it to Scale Animator, so I remember what I'm looking at. Then I modified the scale, which was the first thing I messed with. I keyframed that. It's made it bigger. And then I opened up the range selector to start getting weird with it, and I adjusted the end value. And of course, play with this, have fun. You're going to come up with your own cool things as you do this. And let's go ahead and throw on that motion blur. That's going to give it that little bit of life. It's not moving that much, but it does do something. Let's take it off and watch it. Let's see with motion blur. This doesn't move as much across the screen, so it's not as exciting as it was with the position. But you, again, might find it more exciting if you do more stuff to it. So let's go ahead and close that. Let's turn that off. Our next one that we want to look at is Skew. So let's go ahead and make a new text layer. And we'll call this one Skew. Same thing as before, Command Option Home. Align it. And then, same idea as before. Open up the text layer, click on Animate. Let's click on Skew. When we open up Skew, let's take a look at this thing called Animator 1. Let's just rename it. And I'm just doing this just for my own good, so I remember that this is the Skew Animator. Obviously, you can see the word skew here, but again, when it's all closed up, it might help you to find it. So now when we're looking at Skew Animator, let's take a look at our settings. We want to look at the skew axis, and let's play around with this. And the skew value. So as we adjust the skew value and we play around with the skew axis, it's changing how it skews. I'll put the skew axis back at 0. Kind of like it without messing with the skew axis and just the skew. Okay, so let's say we wanted it to go from here, -65 to +70, right? So it's skewing from left to right. Now, if you think about it, this would be a lot more tricky to do if we had to use transform. So this is a really quick way to do a skew, much faster than if we had to do it another way. Okay, so that's working, right? But now what else can we do to it? Well, let's think about it. Right now it's skewing like this. Let's open up range selector. And as you can imagine, this is going to change the way it works, right? So this is pretty cool because it can make it do a letter at a time, for example. So let's see, right now it was just going this way, right? Let's go ahead and throw in some keyframe animations with the start value. So I'm going from 0 to 100, and let's see the difference. You see how it's got a little bit of a wiggle now, because it kind of gets unskewed as we go, which is pretty cool. Again, experiment. Let's throw in some offset in there. And again, right now I'm experimenting myself. Some things I might do them and I might not like them. Offset, not so exciting. Put it back at 0. But I did like a little bit of that adjustment. And let's turn on our motion blur here. Yeah, and you can see that the motion blur does give it a little bit of flavor as it moves left to right. And especially if we add an additional movement. So here now I'm going to bump this up a little bit by opening up our traditional transform, but we've been using this before in class. And in this case, I'm going to add a position adjustment for the whole thing. So now we're not doing this animator stuff anymore. We're just going to do a regular adjustment for position. And I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the side of the screen in the beginning. And then I'm going to have the whole thing come into the screen. So now, and I'm doing this also to kind of show off our motion blur a little bit more. Motion blur is cool, but if it's not moving enough, you won't notice it. So now we're really going to see that blur as it comes in. So, you know, moving these two things together brings it and gives it a little bit more life. And you might want to modify your values because maybe now you don't see the cool skew anymore. So you would then go ahead and open up your Skew Animator and make some changes, right? Whatever those changes are. Maybe you wanted to skew a little bit less so that it stays a little bit twisted as it flies through, right? So I'm going to modify that. So how about something like that? I think this is getting a little bit better. Yeah. And again, experimenting, everybody. That's all I'm doing. Trying to find out what the best thing is for my idea. And you know what? Sometimes you delete keyframes and you mess around and you move them up and you do whatever you like. But that is skew. So we can skew the letters. Let's go ahead and lock that one. Our next one is going to be rotation. Then we'll do opacity. So we'll make another, bring our playhead back to the beginning. Let's make another new text layer. And this one will be rotation. Again, Command Option Home, selecting it, Command Option Home, align, aligning it to our screen. And as you can guess, the next thing is going to add some rotations. So we're going to look at the text layer, we're going to click on Animate, we're going to click on Rotation. Again, it's going to make something called Animator, which I'm just going to click on Enter and rename it to Rotation Animator so that I remember what I'm doing. And now I'm going to take a look at the rotation value. So this is going to rotate the letters. And if you remember from before, if you want to do individual letters, that's totally cool. But if you want to look at the More Options button, this is where you can change how it works. So you might want to go to Word, for example, if you wanted to rotate the whole word at once. Which I think I kind of like better. So you know what, I'm going to keyframe now the rotation. And since I know I want to do full rotations, I won't change the second value here. I'm just going to change the big number. So I'm going to go up to 1 second and let's do 2 rotations. So it's going to do 2 full rotations, right? Now, of course, you could have used the rotate tool for this, right? But you get the ability to have some extra stuff in here. And that's when we open up that range selector. And let's take a look at what this is going to do. You see how it's going to do that, which is awesome. It's going to do like an individual change as we play around with that ability to change when and how it rotates. So why don't we leave it at 0, but then by the end, let's put it at 100. And again, I'm just experimenting. I have not tried this out yet, but I'm trying it out with you. That's pretty cool. It might be better if this was slower. So you know what, maybe I'm just going to drag both of my keyframes by dragging my mouse around the 2 keyframes and giving myself more time. This is an animation that might look better over a longer period of time. And that is pretty cool. And again, let's play around with some other things. Let's play around with the offset value. I just bumped it up to 44%. Let's see what that does. I kind of like that a little bit better because it seems to be going at a better rate. When I had it at 0, I think that E kind of took a long time to get there, which some of you might like. But I'm going to go ahead and put that offset value back at like 40. That seemed a little bit more natural to me. Kind of happened a little bit quicker, and I didn't have to wait for it as long. And again, let's go ahead and we can turn on for this layer our motion blur. And since it's moving more, we're definitely going to see the benefit of that motion blur. And obviously, there's so many other ways you could have done this because I just did it for the word. If I went back and I changed it to character, we would get a much different animation because it would be each letter versus just the word. And of course, playing with the offset value, that'll change how it works. So imagine having to do that, keyframing all those letters. That would take you a long time. That would take you at least 5 or 10 minutes, if not more. And with this simple adjustment to offset and a simple adjustment up there to the anchor grouping, we're able to do it super quick. So I'm going to put the offset back to 0. And that's looking pretty cool. Right? And of course, change your mind. Do it differently. Do it however you want. That one looks pretty exciting to me. Cool. And that is rotate. Let's go ahead and press save, everybody, right now, if we're doing something that we like. That way we don't lose it. So I'd save this to my desktop right now as animated text. Cool. So that's rotation. I'm going to lock it and turn off the eyeball. And we've got 2 more to go. We've got opacity and then the everything option. So I'm going to make another new one, new text layer, and call it opacity. Grab it with my selection tool, Command Option Home, go to Align, Center, and as you can guess, same steps as before. We're going to open up the opacity text layer, and we're going to then click on Animate, and now we're going to go to Opacity. Cool. Now we're looking at opacity. Now that we're here, same as before, I'm going to still go to Animator, press Enter, and rename it Opacity Animator. You don't have to do this, but I think it makes my life easier just to remember what I'm looking at here. Then I'm going to adjust my opacity control. As you can imagine, that's going to make things appear and reappear. It's pretty simple. We already know about opacity. We've done that before. So let's just go from 100 to 0. So this is, nothing new. You knew how to do opacity, and actually, you could do opacity and transform. You already knew that. But again, remember that when we do it here, we get the range selector. And that's when cool things start to happen. So let's start to see. Aha, you can make it almost look like it's growing across the screen by adjusting the end and start value. Now I've been doing a lot of start adjustments. Let's just do an end one, which means it's going to come from the back first. So I'm going to go to 100 and then we'll put it at 0 here. And let's watch this. See that little bit of, almost looks like it's being highlighted, which is pretty cool. And if I play around with offset, it's going to change where that's happening, which is kind of cool. kind of like that. But again, if you don't, put it on 0. Let's open up advanced and we get those other options too. Remember that we can do stuff versus character, which is maybe if we did the word, what would that do? You see, that's just kind of subtle, not as exciting as characters, but play around with it. I like the character. I like how it looks like it's kind of growing with opacity. Then let's take a look at the shape. We can do ramp up, ramp down. That's kind of cool. It's a little bit more dramatic. How about ramp down? Not as exciting. Triangle. Kind of like that. Round. Let's take a look at that one. Not that different. How about smooth? I think ramp up was my favorite. That was the most dramatic for me. You might have a different option and that's fine. Let's play around with easing. Yeah, even a little bit more subtle. And we can turn on our motion blur. Might not be that exciting because we're not really moving that much in this case. So yeah, motion blur is not giving us much, but what if we add an additional change, right? We can do a transform change. For example, easy one would be position. Maybe this is starting off the top of the screen and then it's coming into the middle. Or maybe even all the way down. I don't know if that'll look any good, but let's just take a look. Not so exciting because we can't see it. So let's actually delete that last keyframe. And let's just bring it right down to the center here. And maybe, you know what? I'm going to keep changing my mind. Maybe I actually wanted to slide in. And maybe that'll look a little bit more cool. And half the time is just experiment. Just see what you like. That's cool. So it might be nice if I was making titles, I could have one word disappearing and fading while another one comes in. And again, if you open up the text layer and you mess around with all this stuff that we were looking at under Opacity Animator, you're bound to come up with something even cooler. So that's opacity. And then the next one we can do is the combo. And this is going to do as many of the things as you want at once. Command Option Home. Let's align this again. And this one is cool, also maybe not as exact because everything's going to be there at once, so you might decide this is cool or not cool. But let's go to All Transform Properties. Now when I open this, you'll notice the animator, and I'm going to call this one All Transform. When I take a look at this one, you'll notice I get anchor point, position, scale, skew axis, rotation. I get everything all at once. So you can play around with position. You could play around with skew, and opacity, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's just go nuts a little bit. Let's do a skew adjustment. We'll go all the way from the left and then all the way to the right. And while we're doing that, let's go ahead and have a position adjustment where we're going to start from the left and then we're going to move into the right. And then why not throw in a rotation as well, just for kicks. Okay. Yeah, I'll go halfway just to be weird. And now let's open up more options. Now, do we want it to be by character or do we want it to be by word? Up to you, right? That's kind of cool. It's sliding around, being skewed. And then open up that range selector so you can adjust when it changes and how it happens. So let's go from 0 to 100. And I've mixed a bunch of stuff together, right? So it's got a little bit more life, I think. Might want to give myself more time to see this so it's not as rushed. So I'm dragging my mouse around the keyframes. Kind of like that. And this would be a good candidate for some motion blur. Your computer might slow down during the motion blur options, so be prepared for that. And obviously, everybody, this is just simple white text on a simple background. You could be doing all kinds of other stuff. You could be finding your favorite font. You could be putting in a cool image in the background. You could be blending between the words. So, for example, right now, if you take a look at what I've done, I've got a stacked set here, and it's only 3 seconds long. What if I went into my composition settings? Let's just make it a little bit longer. Let's go ahead and make this 15 seconds long. Now, I know this might be a challenge for some of you on your computers, which is totally understandable because it might be hard to render this stuff, especially if you have a slower computer. But the reason I made it longer is just because now I could do some stacking of some of the things that I've done. Turn on some eyeballs. And imagine you had a title, right? You could be fading between those words. So you could be telling a little story that way. Now, since we've already done all that other cool stuff, this would probably be a good time to play around with opacity, just like we've normally done, right? So skew is that first one. So I'm not going to mess with any of that other stuff we did before. I'm just going to do the traditional opacity, something we did in the beginning of our semester. So I want it to still be 100 right around here, but I want it to fade away as rotate comes into town. So I'm going to put my opacity at 0 here. So this is just a traditional opacity change. It's not one of those animator changes. But what's cool is I'm going to do that so that I can bring in my next word, right? And obviously you can have a lot more fun with that. This is super basic, but that's the idea. You're going to play around with the layers, and I'll keep doing this just to kind of finish off this thought, where I'm not going to mess with that animator stuff anymore. Now I'm just going to look at the layer and do just traditional stuff, traditional movements. So in this case it appears, and maybe I'd like it to fade away right around there. And skew could have probably faded at a different time. Right? And there you go. So you're mixing new stuff by clicking on animate, and then you're also just doing your traditional adjustments that you know from transform. And you can add these, and I'll show you this example next. Now this is probably going to be a mess because I have not practiced this one, but it's something that you can mess with. So this is, let's call this mix. Command Option Home, and let's press Align and center it. And the things I'm going to do differently this time is I'm going to do, let's go ahead and do a position change. Let's rename it. Okay, and let's just remember, position just moves it across the screen. Pretty simple stuff. And we'll move it all the way over here to the left. Okay, so that's just a simple position change. Let's throw in some stuff that we already knew about position, like for example the start and end value, right? We knew about that. So let's do a little animation to that. So So you see how I'm moving it left and right, but then it's slamming back because I'm adjusting that start value, which is kind of cool. I could open up advanced and maybe go in there and add a modification to, how about ease low? It's got a little bit more bounce to it now, which is kind of nice. But now here's the cool thing that we can do next. If we close the position animator, the one we just created, now let's go back to this text layer. We're still on the same one. Now let's add another thing. Now, for example, let's add a skew. So now it's got position animator and I'm adding skew on top of it. Let's play around with the skew. And so now it's going to do all those other things that we did and skew. So it's similar to the combo that we were doing earlier, but what's kind of nicer about this is you get more control. So now it's doing its moving and it's skewing, which is cool. And we should probably make it go back to 0 here. So it looks like it got twisted and turned and then got itself back upright. And you could keep going. You could do another one on top of this if you wanted. And so I'll do opacity. Again, I'm going to rename these as I go. And let's do that again. I don't think it added. There we go. And now opacity animator. Let's go ahead and keyframe some of that. Maybe we'll make it go to slightly invisible and then bring it back. It's going to fade in and fade back in, and let's open up that range selector and let's play around with the start. And again, I'm just experimenting here, everybody. I didn't practice this one before. But that's kind of cool, right? I mixed all three together. And I just kept pressing this and adding more. And that looks pretty cool to me. And now what I could do is, again, turn on that motion blur. Right, helps with some of that movement. And if that's not exciting enough to me, why not just throw a big transform on the whole thing, where maybe we'll do a position change. We'll make this thing, how about fly in? Let's watch that. All right, and maybe we probably want it to end up in a different location. So I'm going to put it back to here. Cool. And obviously, this is just the beginning. You want to go in here and experiment and do whatever it is that you like. You want to play with different colors, different backgrounds, different effects. All of this stuff could have effects applied to it. And again, I'm just going to experiment with that right now, window, and if I go to my effects and presets, what if I threw in, and this might slow your computer a little bit, but what if I throw in some bad TV? Remember some of this? We did this on some of our projects where we warped it, make it look old and stuff. Let's go ahead and throw bad TV onto this layer. And remember, bad TV gives you those little warps and bends and stuff. I'm just going to play around with these values a little bit. Yeah, give it some glitchiness there. And see, now we've mixed our text effect with a little extra bit of glitching with some wave warping, which is pretty cool. Looks like it's on that bad TV and it's alive. And I did this by just applying an effect now on top of it. Now, obviously, your computer might be freaking out a little bit here because this is going to take a while. But now let's watch it. Let's go back. Way cooler, right? It's got that glitch effect now, which is kind of nice. And one thing we would probably do here is we could, go ahead and add colors to it or something, or just, again, go nuts. Go nuts with it. This was just white text, right? Pretty boring. I could have made this more exciting by adding a little bit of something else to the color of the type. So if I go back into Window Character, let's double click our layer here. What if this was, how about green, right? And now here I'm just experimenting, everybody. I did this all in green. What if I copied this layer now and then made this other one red, or how about magenta? And then what I'm going to do with these is I'm just going to ever so slightly offset this other one. Right? So now I've got a cool thing. Obviously, it's going to take a minute to load. But I've got this like offset to color type. And if you think about it, this took a while to make, but it would have taken so much longer to have to keyframe each one of those little things. And with these text effects, we can kind of cheat and do a lot of things quick. And that's what I want you to experiment with for your next project. You are playing with the text tools, you are playing with that animate button, and then you are just having fun. So give it a shot, everybody, and hope you're doing great, and talk to you soon.